The house wore midnight like a thick coat. Rain feathered against the windows, the old maple outside smudging shadows across the hallway wall. Claire paused at the top of the stairs and listened, heater humming, clock ticking, nothing else. David slept in their room at the far end, the steady tide of his breathing comforting and inconvenient. She tightened her cardigan around her ribs and slipped down the steps, each one taken on the outside edge to avoid the groan in the middle. Margaret's study smelled faintly of cedar polish and old paper. Family portraits watched from the shelves, David in a school uniform, Margaret in her garden hat, the wedding photo where Claire held a bouquet and the future looked weightless. She avoided that one. Her hands shook as she closed the door softly, leaving it a thumb's width open to keep the hinge from clicking. The safe crouched behind the antique file cabinet, a squat iron thing with a brass dial that remembered warmer years. Claire dragged the cabinet just enough to reveal the door. She knelt, breath fogging the cold steel, and pulled a key from the tiny pocket sewn into her cardigan. She had lifted it weeks ago when Margaret forgot it near the ironing board, testing it secretly at noon while dinner simmered and conversations floated past like harmless clouds. 32 right. 16 left. 17 right. The numbers spun beneath her fingers like a prayer she didn't want to say. Just one more piece, she whispered, as if the safe needed reassurance. Just until next month. A house makes noises when you trespass inside it. The lamp's cloth shade rustled. The heater thumped. Somewhere upstairs a pipe sighed. Claire's mouth went dry anyway. She pressed her ear to the metal and turned the dial slower, until she felt that private drop in her stomach, the soft internal click that felt exactly like getting away with something. She pulled the handle. The hinges gave a padded groan, like an old man stretching after a nap. Claire parted the heavy door and leaned in, already picturing the red velvet boxes, the slender chains that behaved like liquid in her palm. She had a buyer waiting this time, an easy man who didn't ask for receipts, just jewelry and stories. There were no boxes. The top shelf held a neat arrangement of envelopes. A stack of glossy photographs lay under a paperweight shaped like a bird. On the second shelf sat a velvet wrap tied with a narrow satin ribbon. And on the third, small as a fingernail, rested a black USB drive with a single red dot that pulsed, patient and alive. For a moment Claire didn't understand the shapes, the brain resists a truth it hasn't rehearsed. She reached for a photograph with fingers gone clumsy. The first image showed a woman in a gray coat stepping into Bramble and Sons Pawn at dusk. The blurred face could have been anyone. Her stomach steadied. She set it down, reached for the next, and this time the door was frozen mid-swing, the fluorescent sign bright, and her face, tilted to the streetlight, unmistakable. Claire. The leopard print scarf. The ring she wore to look respectable. Something icy crawled up her spine. She spread the photos with both hands, the paper whispering against the wood. There she was in different angles, buying envelopes, exchanging velvet, tucking a gold chain into her purse. Another picture caught the slope of her neck as she counted folded bills. In one she smiled, a quick private smile she didn't know belonged to her, a fox's flash. She forced herself to breathe through her nose. "This is a joke," she mouthed, but the room didn't answer. The USB's red dot blinked again, a soft heartbeat. Beneath the photographs, a corner of cream paper peeked out, Margaret's handwriting curling across the edge like a vine. Claire didn't pull it free. Her thumb had started to tremble, and she didn't want to see words that would settle the fact of the thing. Rain thickened, pattering quicker on the glass. Claire turned her face toward the door's narrow gap. The hall outside was flat and dark, no movement, no witness. She eased the safe door wider and touched the velvet bundle. Weight tugged at the fabric, something small, dense, dear. She knew the way velvet gives under your fingertips when it covers something that matters. She knew too many of Margaret's boxes not to recognize reverence. "What did you do?" she whispered to the dark, not sure whether she meant Margaret or herself. A floorboard far above creaked, casual as someone turning in a dream. Claire froze, hand on velvet, eyes on the hall. She waited 10 long counts, then 10 more. The house answered with silence. Slowly she slid the bundle toward the lip of the shelf, breath shallow, half expecting the safe to slam shut on its own like a trap in an animal video. The brass paperweight reflected the room in warped miniature, door crack, desk edge, a slice of her face, pale and thinner than she felt. She pushed the photographs back into a rough pile, trying to bury the one where she was laughing, because laughter made everything worse. In the reflection, the red dot pulsed again. She drew the velvet to her knees and rested it there, ribbon against her skin. Her mind rushed ahead. If she snapped the USB in half and burned the photos, if she returned everything tomorrow and cried, if she told Margaret she had borrowed, not stolen. Every branch of thought ended with the same image, Margaret's eyes when they went quiet. Claire swallowed. From somewhere in the house, a soft ceramic clink sounded, like a teacup meeting a saucer. The noise was ordinary and devastating. She pulled the ribbon loose. 2 months earlier, the house carried a different weight. The air was still warm from late summer, sun bleeding through lace curtains and making everything look harmless. Margaret had spent the morning polishing her jewelry, each piece laid on the dining table under a cloth mat like students waiting for roll call. She loved this ritual, the steady rub of cloth against gold, the small satisfaction when a pearl shone brighter under her touch. These were not just ornaments, they were fragments of her life. The bracelet her husband gave her on their 10th anniversary, the brooch she wore to David's graduation, the necklace her mother left her wrapped in tissue paper. Each shimmered with memory. That morning, something caught her attention. A thin gold chain, her everyday piece, was gone. Margaret frowned, checked the box again, then the side drawer. She even peered under the mat, though she knew it wasn't there. She sat back, cloth limp in her hand, and let the thought pass. Age, she told herself. Forgetfulness. She was 62 now, and perhaps her memory was playing tricks. But 3 weeks later, it happened again. This time it wasn't subtle. Her pearl bracelet, a piece so heavy it left marks on her skin after parties, was missing. Margaret felt her chest tighten. She searched her room with a kind of panic she hadn't known since losing David at the fair when he was 6. She lifted cushions, opened every drawer twice, even crawled under the bed with a flashlight. Nothing. Margaret sat on the carpet, light buzzing faintly in the lamp above, and tried to breathe. Her mind jumped through possibilities. Had she misplaced it at the jeweler's? Had she left it at church? Or, she pushed the thought away quickly, had someone taken it? The next evening, Margaret found her answer. Claire left her purse on the sofa when she went to the kitchen for tea. Margaret didn't mean to pry, but when the bag tipped and a slip of paper slid to the carpet, her eyes caught the bold black letters, Bramble and Sons Pawn. Margaret picked it up. Her fingers tightened against the thin paper as she read the details. Item, pearl bracelet. Sale completed. Paid in cash. The date matched the day her bracelet disappeared. Margaret folded the slip and set it back inside the purse with careful precision. She didn't rush. She didn't storm into the kitchen. Instead, she smoothed her skirt, sat back on the sofa, and fixed her face into its usual mask. When Claire returned with 2 steaming cups, Margaret smiled as if nothing in the world had changed. Chamomile, Claire said brightly, placing the cup on the coaster. Her voice was warm, practiced. Margaret studied her, really studied her, the way her lips curled into a small self-satisfied smile, the way her nails gleamed fresh from polish, the faint perfume that was not cheap. That night, lying in bed, Margaret's heart thumped hard against the silence. Betrayal burned deeper than anger. It wasn't just the theft, it was the intimacy of it. Claire had been in her study, touching the things she treasured most, pawning them piece by piece like they were meaningless trinkets. And all while calling her mom over dinner, laughing in David's arms, pouring tea with the gentlest of hands. But Margaret did not confront her. She was not reckless. No, she would do what she had always done, she would observe, wait, and choose her moment carefully. The very next day, Margaret went to her bank. She transferred the rest of her jewelry to a private safety deposit box. She kept the home safe exactly as it was, keys in the usual drawer, cabinet still half hiding the iron door. Only now, instead of velvet boxes, she placed inside a folder of documents, pawn receipts she quietly bought back from the shops, and a camera no bigger than a thumb, disguised as a paperweight. The plan wasn't born from vengeance alone. It was born from necessity. Margaret knew that if she confronted Claire, David would defend his wife blindly. If she accused without proof, she'd be painted bitter, jealous, paranoid. No, she needed evidence so sharp it could cut through denial. Evidence Claire couldn't wriggle free from. That evening, over roast chicken, Claire chatted about neighborhood gossip, her laughter a shade too bright. Margaret carved her meat slowly, smiling at the right places, nodding at the right times. But inside, a calm storm began to rise. Her smile was still there. To Claire, it looked unchanged, warm, grandmotherly, trusting. But Margaret knew it had cracked. And in that crack, revenge had already begun to take root. The Sunday table gleamed under the chandelier's soft light. Margaret had set it as she always did, polished cutlery, folded napkins, the old floral china that carried the weight of family dinners past. A roast sat in the center, steam curling like a ribbon, while bowls of potatoes and green beans surrounded it. The atmosphere looked warm, inviting, even celebratory. But beneath the glow, tension coiled, invisible but sharp. Claire's laughter filled the space first. It was light, charming, almost rehearsed, her voice the highest note in the room. She told a story about a friend's disastrous haircut, one hand resting lightly on David's shoulder as if she were staking her claim. David laughed with her, head tilted back, his eyes glowing the way they always did when he admired her. Margaret watched quietly from the opposite end of the table. Her fork hovered above her plate as her lips curved into a smile that was perfect in form but hollow in warmth. To David, it was the smile of a mother pleased to see her family happy. To Claire, it was safe cover, proof that her thefts remained undiscovered. Only Margaret knew the truth, it was a smile stretched tight enough to mask a storm. "Mom, you've really outdone yourself," David said, cutting into the roast. "Claire keeps telling me I'm spoiled by your cooking." Claire placed her hand dramatically over her chest, widening her eyes with playful sincerity. "It's true. I don't know how she does it. I burn toast half the time, and here she is, feeding us feasts." Margaret inclined her head, murmuring, "Experience, dear. That's all it is." Inside, her stomach twisted. Experience, indeed. Experience that told her when laughter was too forced, when gratitude was painted in brushstrokes too bold. Experience that taught her silence could be a weapon sharper than words. She studied Claire's every move, the way her diamond earrings glittered as she tossed her hair, the glint of a new bracelet sliding down her wrist. Margaret recognized it instantly. The pawnshops were filled with her past, but Claire had dressed herself with someone else's future. The bracelet was too new, too expensive for David's modest salary. Margaret reached for the gravy, her hand steady though her pulse quickened. "Lovely piece you're wearing," she said softly, her tone casual, almost motherly. "A gift?" For half a heartbeat, Claire froze. It was a small flicker, just the briefest hesitation in her smile, but Margaret saw it. Then Claire recovered, nodding quickly. "Yes, from David. He's too kind." David chuckled, oblivious. "I told her she deserves something nice. I don't spoil her enough." Margaret's eyes rested on her son, and she swallowed the ache in her throat. He believed it. Of course he did. His love was sincere, blind, loyal. He couldn't see the hairline fractures in the woman beside him. He couldn't hear the false sweetness ringing off her every word. The conversation drifted to lighter things, vacation plans, neighborhood events, but Margaret let her mind wander. She imagined the safe, dark and waiting, its iron stomach no longer filled with her life's treasures but with evidence. Photographs. Receipts. A USB flashing silently in the dark. Each item a seed planted, waiting for the right season to bloom. Claire reached for her wine glass, her laugh bright and careless again. "You know, Margaret, you should let me help with the dishes tonight. I feel guilty just sitting here after such a beautiful meal. Margaret folded her napkin and placed it gently on the table, her smile widening with practiced warmth. That's sweet of you, dear. But I'd never want to trouble you. Inside, the words tasted like iron. She wanted Claire's hands in the kitchen sink, water soaking her sleeves, because thieves deserve small humiliations. But patience, Margaret reminded herself. The sink could wait. The trap was already set, and Claire would walk into it when she thought no one was watching. As the plates cleared and the evening wound down, Margaret rose from her chair, her movements graceful, deliberate. The porcelain plates clinked softly, delicate and fragile, just like the masks they all wore at that table. Claire's mask of innocence. David's mask of pride. And Margaret's mask of maternal calm, stretched tight to hide the silent rage burning underneath. In the quiet that followed dinner, as Claire laughed once more at something David whispered, Margaret realized the truth. Betrayal could sit across from you at a dinner table, wear your bracelet, and drink your wine, and still look you in the eye without flinching. Her smile stayed, porcelain perfect. But in the crack beneath it, her revenge was already alive, breathing, and waiting for its moment to strike. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the world damp and glistening. Margaret sat at her writing desk, her pen scratching quietly across a sheet of cream paper. Her hand was steady, her face calm, but her thoughts were sharp as glass. Each word she wrote carried weight, a message she wanted burned into memory. You sell memories, not metal. She folded the note, tied it with a ribbon, and placed it beneath the small velvet wrap that held the ring her late mother had left her. That ring had been missing for weeks. Margaret had found it sitting in a pawnshop window, glinting under fluorescent light like a prisoner begging for release. She had bought it back with cash, the shopkeeper oblivious to the history he was selling. Holding it in her palm afterward, Margaret had felt both grief and clarity. That was the moment she knew her revenge would not be loud, it would be precise, deliberate, unforgettable. Now, the ring rested inside the safe once more, not as treasure but as bait. Next to it, the photographs lay neatly stacked. They showed Claire at pawn counters, cash-changing hands, eyes darting nervously over her shoulder. Margaret had spent weeks retrieving them, paying favors and calling in discreet contacts. She had even charmed a shopkeeper into providing receipts, each stamped with dates and amounts. And then there was the USB. Its small red light blinked whenever connected, a heartbeat in plastic form. On it, hours of footage, Claire slipping into the study at night, opening the safe with stolen keys, pocketing jewelry while glancing at the shadows. Margaret had reviewed the clips late into the night, each one feeding the cold fire in her chest. She added a final touch, an automatic email timer. If the USB was removed and not returned within minutes, its contents would be sent directly to David and her lawyer. She closed the safe gently, letting the heavy door echo against the quiet study. The trap was ready. That evening, the house carried a deceptive warmth. David stretched on the couch, distracted by his laptop, while Claire scrolled her phone, her legs curled neatly beneath her. She looked elegant, perfectly composed, the very image of a devoted wife. Margaret observed them from her armchair, knitting needles clicking softly. "Mom," David said suddenly, not looking up, "didn't you have a jewelry appraisal coming up?" Margaret smiled faintly. "Not anymore. I moved most of the pieces to the bank. Safer that way." Claire's head turned just a fraction, quick and sharp, before she masked it with a sip of wine. Margaret caught it. She always caught the small things. Later that night, when the house grew quiet, Margaret lingered at the top of the stairs. She watched Claire slip out of the bedroom, bare feet silent against the wood. Claire moved like someone rehearsed, like a dancer stepping into a role. Margaret didn't follow. She simply returned to her room, sat in bed, and waited with a calm that felt almost holy. Down in the study, Claire knelt before the safe again. She moved faster this time, confidence growing. Her fingers twisted the dial, her breath quickening with each turn. The heavy door groaned open, and she smiled in triumph, until her eyes landed on the velvet bundle. For a moment she hesitated. The photographs scattered across the shelf unnerved her, but she told herself it was impossible. Margaret couldn't know. She reached for the velvet anyway, pulling it into her lap. The ribbon slid loose, and the bundle unfolded like a secret revealed. The ring gleamed in her palm, a delicate circle of gold carrying a history she didn't care to know. But the note beneath it stopped her breath. She unfolded the paper slowly, her eyes darting across the words. "You sell memories, not metal." Her hands shook. The photographs suddenly felt heavier, the USB's red dot pulsed louder. Claire's throat tightened as the realization pressed in. She wasn't stealing anymore, she was walking into a stage that Margaret had set, every detail waiting for her like lines in a play. For the first time, Claire felt fear prickle her skin. The safe was no longer just a vault. It was a mirror, showing her exactly what she was, and Margaret was holding the frame. The velvet ribbon lay in Claire's lap like a vein cut open. She stared at the note again, "You sell memories, not metal," until the words throbbed. The USB's red dot pulsed in the corner of her eye, steady as a metronome. A soft click broke the room's hush. The study door widened. Margaret stood there in a wool robe the color of ash, hair pinned back, face unarmed. No raised voice, no drama. Only the kind of quiet that made Claire feel smaller than the chair she sat on. "I wondered when you would come," Margaret said. Her voice was almost tender, the way a nurse speaks before an injection. "Close the safe, dear. You're letting the heat out." Claire's mouth worked and failed. She pushed the safe door gently until the rubber seal kissed the frame. From the desk, the brass paperweight, its tiny lens invisible unless you knew, watched. Margaret crossed to the desk, set down her phone, and turned the screen so Claire could see. An email window sat open, draft addressed to David Harper and Fiona Keene, ESQ. A blue banner across the top read scheduled send, 1:10 a.m. Beneath it, a countdown ticked, 08:37. 08:36. "The motion sensor in the paperweight woke me at 12:58, Margaret said. "When the safe opens at night, the camera sends me an alert and starts a delay. I can cancel before the timer ends, or it goes out with everything attached." Claire's throat closed on air. This is blackmail." "No," Margaret said, and for the first time there was steel. "This is mercy with a clock." She set a thin folder on the desk and slid it across. "Two paths. One is public. Police, divorce court, pawn receipts, you in every frame. It will hurt David most." She opened the folder to the first page. "Or this, a private confession and restitution, witnessed by me, reviewed by my lawyer in the morning." Claire stared at the page. "Volunteer service and restitution agreement." Below, a paragraph in plain language. "I, Claire Harper, acknowledge removing and selling jewelry belonging to Margaret Harper without her consent. I agree to repay the full amount documented in attached receipts and to complete 6 weeks, 240 hours, of supervised service at the Second Chance charity shop as repayment in kind. I understand this agreement may be shared with legal counsel if I breach any term." There were numbered attachments, copies of pawn stubs, photographs clipped at the corners, a running tally at the back that made her stomach drop. The last page had 3 signature lines: Claire Harper, witness, date, time. A sticky note flagged the margin, initial here, here, and here. "I'll repay," Claire whispered. Please don't send that email. David will." Her voice cracked on his name. Margaret's gaze didn't soften so much as steady. "I am not interested in ruining you. I am interested in stopping you. You will repay every cent. You will work in front of people you cannot lie to. And you will tell my son the truth yourself, tomorrow morning, in this room, with me present. Or the email tells him for you." She tipped the phone. 06:49. 06:48. Claire glanced toward the hall like a trapped animal measuring doors. For a flicker of a second she imagined bolting, imagined yanking the phone, smashing the USB, running upstairs to David and waking him with a story polished smooth. Then she saw the photographs again, her own fox smile, and something inside her gave way. 6 weeks, she asked, stalling for oxygen. Working, where people know. Where you will know, Margaret said. Every hour accounted for. Every receipt documented. No more pawnshops. No more borrowing what isn't yours. And you will stay under my roof while you do it, so I can look you in the eye. Claire's chin lifted with a shadow of pride. That's humiliation. That's consequence, Margaret replied. They stood in silence, the room ticking. Claire reached for the pen, then pulled her hand back as if the ink would burn. If I sign, you cancel it. Right now. I cancel when you sign, and you initial every page, Margaret said. I will also call Fiona at 9 a.m. to witness a second copy. You won't be trapped by rumor. Only by your own words. Claire's shoulders rounded. She picked up the pen. The nib scratched. Claire Harper, 40 strokes that felt like a confession and a sentence. She initialed the margins with a shaking ch, page after page, throat tight, eyes stinging. Margaret watched, neither gloating nor forgiving, the way a surgeon watches a line return to a monitor. When Claire set the pen down, Margaret tapped the phone. Cancel send? She pressed cancel, and the blue banner disappeared. You'll start at the shop tomorrow, Margaret said, gathering the signed pages into order. 8 a.m. were something you can move in. Claire laughed then, one sharp, ugly sound, because she needed to put the fear somewhere. And if I don't show? Margaret slipped the agreement into a plastic sleeve. Then the public path opens. I've already done the hard part. Claire swallowed. What hard part? Loving my son enough to invite you to change, Margaret said, and it landed heavier than any threat. The USB's red light pulsed once more. Claire reached toward it and stopped. She thought the worst thing she could find in that safe would be proof. She was wrong. The worst thing was a mirror and a clock. Morning slid in gray and cool. At 7:05, Claire stood in the study doorway clutching the signed agreement like it might bite. David was already knotting his tie in the hall mirror, phone wedged to his ear. Site audit moved up, he mouthed to Margaret, apologetic. To Claire, dinner tonight? We can talk then, sorry, love. He kissed her cheek and was gone in a gust of aftershave and urgency, the front door thudding shut like a period. Margaret didn't chase the moment. 9 o'clock we speak to Fiona, she said instead. You will confirm you signed freely. Her tone made freely sound like a weight placed gently and deliberately in the center of the table. At 9:02, Fiona Keene appeared on the screen, neat bun, square glasses, a voice that filed edges. She read the clause aloud, asked Claire to state her name, today's date, and that she understood repayment in 6 weeks of supervised service. Claire's yes came out thin but audible. Fiona nodded, satisfied, and signed the witness line on her end. The document was now more than paper, it had teeth. By 10 o'clock, the bell above the door of Second Chance Charity Shop chimed them inside. The place hummed with fluorescent light and quiet industry, racks of winter coats organized by color, a table of paperbacks with curled corners, a glass case of donated trinkets, brooches winking like small secrets. A hand-lettered sign by the till, every item has a story. Thank you for yours. I'm Ivy, said a woman in her 50s with a soft cardigan and a sharper eye. We open at 10. Claire, you'll start with intake, gloves there, tags there. Margaret usually does the donor desk. Claire smiled with her whole face, the way she did at Neighbors. Of course. Happy to help. The words tasted like chalk. She hauled trash bags of donations onto the sorting table, working quicker than her frame suggested she could. A single mother with a stroller brought in baby clothes and left with a voucher. An elderly man named Mr. Klein tried on 3 tweed caps and bought the ugliest one because it had history. Claire kept her smile warm, her voice low, her hands busy. Customers thanked her. Ivy praised her speed. Margaret watched. At 12:40, Ivy handed Claire the till while she went to the back to check a delivery. The drawer slid open with a soft sigh. A man paid for a lamp with a 50, Claire counted back his change, the choreography precise. On the counter sat a plastic jar labeled coffee for volunteers with a slurry of coins and crumpled bills. When a teenager bought a paperback and dumped a palmful of change, Claire's fingers worked quickly, tidying, aligning, and, almost without thought, palming a 5 from the tip jar as she pushed the coins down. A magician's move, quick and vanishing. From the mezzanine office window, Margaret wrote in a narrow notebook, 1243, register variance likely. Claire on till. Jar dipped. She didn't descend. She didn't clear her throat. She only logged and filed, the way rain logs a roofline. The performance went on. Claire fetched hangers, carried boxes, complimented a teacher's scarf. She laughed with Ivy about mismatched mugs, folded sweaters into pleasing stacks. The approval fed something hungry and wounded inside her. She made it bigger, brighter, better. She was building a new face and dared Margaret to call it a mask. By 3, the smile ached. In the bathroom mirror, under the humming fan, she pressed cold water to her neck until goosebumps rose. She took out her phone, turned her body away from the door, and typed with fast thumbs. Vince, need one more run. Tonight if possible. Same buyer? 3 dots, then, Vince, can. You sure? Heat on you now. Claire, just finish it. Clean slate. She deleted the thread, then deleted the deletion. Back on the floor, Margaret guided a donor through a receipt while watching Claire in the glass reflection of the case. Claire lifted a box to the stockroom, paused at Margaret's desk, and tested a drawer. It was locked. She slid her hand under the blotter, felt nothing, and lifted the brass paperweight an inch, turning it absently as if admiring the bird. The lens, no bigger than a seed, caught the overhead light. Claire set it down facing away from the register, casual as a cat nudging a figurine. At closing, Ivy counted the drawer and frowned. Odd. 5 short. In the tip jar, she trailed off, glancing between them. Claire's cheeks colored expertly. Oh, that teenager, the one with the hoodie, he took change out after he put some in. I should have said something. She added a little self-reproach. I'll watch closer tomorrow. Thank you, Ivy said, unconvinced but kind. Margaret wrote another line in her notebook, 1658, story offered unprompted. They locked up at dusk. Back home, Claire went straight to the study on pretense of returning a book. She stood in the doorway and surveyed the room like a thief measuring light. With 2 fingers she plucked a sticky note from the desk pad and, in a movement so lazy it looked like housekeeping, pressed it over the tiny eye in the paperweight. Yellow square. Innocent. Effective. Margaret appeared behind her with 2 cups of tea, saw the note, and set both cups down without comment. She lifted the paperweight, peeled the square off, folded it twice, and dropped it in the bin. Dust doesn't settle there, she said mildly. Claire's laugh came too bright. I must have, sorry. Later, in bed with the lights out, she stared at the ceiling and mouthed numbers like prayers, rental arrears, a credit card payment, Vince's fee. The day had been a theater and she'd been wonderful in it. Tomorrow she would be better. And then, once she finished the job, the stage would go dark and no one would be the wiser. In the guest room across the hall, Margaret sat with her narrow notebook open, filling the last line of the page, pattern stabilizing. Restraint required. Move trust appointment up. She closed the book, turned off the lamp, and let the house listen to the 2 of them breathing, one breath smooth and practiced, the other catching on the word finish. The bell above the charity shop door chimed just after noon on Wednesday. The air outside was brittle with cold, but inside the second chance shop warmth hummed from the heaters and the smell of old paperbacks lingered. Claire stood behind the counter, hair tied neatly, cardigan soft and respectable. She was rehearsing her newest mask, the model daughter-in-law who gave her time freely, smile ready for strangers. The customer was a woman with gray hair pulled into a bun and a wool scarf looped twice around her neck. She carried a large paper bag, shoulders tense as though the fabric strained with secrets. Donations, she said, setting the bag on the counter. Claire slipped on gloves, cheerful as always. Of course. Let me just tag these. She pulled sweaters, a child's coat, and finally a jewelry box with its hinges cracked. The woman hesitated. Keep the box, not the contents, she said firmly. She reached across and removed the earrings inside, tucking them into her pocket. Then her eyes fell fully on Claire. For a moment her gaze narrowed, as if chasing memory across fog. You, she said suddenly. Claire froze, the smile plastered midair. I'm sorry. I know you. The woman's voice sharpened. Bramble and Sons. 2 months ago. You were selling gold chains. The words cut the air like glass. Ivy, nearby, looked up from a rack of coats. Margaret, in the back sorting books, paused mid-motion, ears pricking at the shift in tone. Claire's laugh came too quickly, too brittle. Oh, I think you're mistaken. I don't even know where that is. But the woman wasn't backing down. I don't mistake faces. I remember because you were nervous, kept tapping your nails on the counter. I thought, poor girl, desperate for cash. But now I see. Her eyes swept the shop, then Margaret appeared quietly in the doorway. Claire's heart slammed against her ribs. Heat crawled up her throat. She scrambled for control, lowering her voice to something soft, wounded. Maybe someone who looks like me. People say I have one of those faces. The woman snorted. Faces don't lie when they wear the same scarf. Leopard print. I told you it was tacky. She turned to Margaret. I could swear it was her. Margaret stepped forward with grace, her hands folded before her. Thank you for your generosity today. We'll take good care of these items. Ivy, please help our guest with a receipt. The woman's eyes lingered on Claire one last time before she allowed Ivy to guide her away. The bell chimed as the door closed behind her, leaving silence heavy as wet wool. Claire's hands shook on the jewelry box. Some people, she forced a small laugh. They just think they know everyone. Margaret's gaze did not move. It wasn't angry. It wasn't even sharp. It was steady, like the weight of a stone in a river, immovable, waiting. Some people, she said softly, remember more than others expect. Claire looked down, cheeks burning. She felt exposed, as if the entire shop had turned into a spotlight. That evening, David sat at the dining table, tie loosened, exhausted from work. Margaret ladled soup into bowls. Claire joined them, face bright but voice a little too loud, spinning trivial stories about customers at the shop. David chuckled, but Margaret caught the tremor in his laugh. He had overheard fragments at the shop earlier, pawn, chains, her, and though he hadn't asked yet, confusion gnawed at him. Margaret studied him, then quietly marked the shift in her mind. The seed was planted. The truth was circling closer, not because she pushed, but because the world itself was starting to whisper. Later, when dishes were cleared, Margaret sat in her study, reviewing her narrow notebook under the soft lamplight. She added a line, recognition confirmed. Witness credible. David overheard. She underlined it twice, then reached for another folder, her family trust papers. With calm precision, she began writing notes in the margin about updates. In the room down the hall, Claire scrolled her phone under the blanket, whispering to Vince about finishing the job soon. Her smile returned, but it was thinner now, more desperate. The past, she realized, didn't stay buried. Sometimes it walked right through the shop door and said your name. And when it did, you had to lie faster than your heart could race. The following morning dawned pale and cold, frost webbing across the windows. Margaret sat at her oak desk, glasses balanced on her nose, while a stack of legal documents rested neatly at her elbow. The encounter in the shop the day before had confirmed what she already knew, the past was beginning to seep through Claire's cracks. People remembered. People spoke. It was time to sharpen the quiet trap she had set weeks ago. The volunteer service and restitution agreement Claire had signed lay open before her, the inked signature still dark and slightly uneven where Claire's hand had trembled. Margaret read the words again, letting their weight settle. Acknowledges removing and selling jewelry, agrees to repay, understands this agreement may be shared with legal counsel. It was no longer a scrap of paper. It was a rope, one end wrapped around Claire's wrist, the other tied securely in Margaret's grasp. At 9 o'clock sharp, Fiona Keene arrived. The lawyer carried her leather portfolio under one arm, her shoes tapping a rhythm of quiet authority. She greeted Margaret with a polite nod, and when Claire entered the study a moment later, Fiona's gaze flicked to her, professional but unyielding. "Mrs. Harper," Fiona said, opening the folder, "we need to finalize yesterday's agreement with attachments. I'll review it line by line to ensure everyone understands." Claire perched on the edge of her chair, her cardigan pulled tight, a smile fixed but brittle. "Of course." The review was meticulous. Pawn receipts clipped in order, photographs attached, a tally of values neatly typed. Fiona's voice was clinical, each sentence another nail. Claire responded with small nods, eyes darting between the lawyer's pen and Margaret's calm face. When Fiona reached the clause about restitution, Claire's lips pressed thin. "And here," Fiona continued, tapping the page, "we've included a secondary provision. Any act of dishonesty discovered after this date will be considered a breach. In that event, this agreement becomes admissible as evidence of past misconduct, and any spousal claim on the Harper family trust is voided." Claire's head snapped up. "Excuse me?" Margaret's expression didn't change. "You married into this family. The trust protects David. It also protects the house, the land, the accounts. I won't allow greed to poison what his father built." Claire's pulse hammered in her ears. "You can't just..." Fiona slid another sheet forward. "She can. This is a conditional trust update. Your signature yesterday, under Clause 3, already constitutes admission. This page only links that admission to the trust. It doesn't create new obligations, it simply ensures that dishonesty voids your rights." The words landed like stone. Claire's fingers hovered above the paper. She could almost hear a door closing, heavy and final. Her voice cracked. "So, if I make one mistake..." Margaret leaned forward slightly, her voice calm, almost gentle. "Then you've chosen the public path instead of the private one. And everything you fear will become truth." The study filled with silence thick enough to choke on. Outside, a bird pecked at the frozen ground, wings fluttering. Inside, Claire's hand finally moved, her initials scrawled again at the margin. She could feel the rope tighten, the fibers biting her skin. When Fiona left, portfolio tucked back under her arm, Claire remained in her chair, staring at the ink that tethered her. Margaret closed the folder and placed it into the safe, her movements smooth, deliberate. She turned the handle until the seal clicked shut. "Paper," Margaret said quietly, "can be sharper than knives when you know how to use it." Claire swallowed, her throat raw. She forced a smile, brittle as glass. "Then I'll just never slip again." Margaret's eyes lingered on her, steady as a stone in water. "For your sake, dear, I hope not." As the afternoon light dimmed, Claire busied herself at the shop, smile bright, voice warm, hands folding clothes into neat squares. But every time she touched paper, receipts, price tags, donation slips, she felt the teeth of the other paper waiting in the safe, ready to bite if she faltered. And deep inside, she knew Margaret wasn't simply waiting for her to slip. She was watching, recording, and preparing for the day Claire's mask would finally crack. The winter night pressed against the windows, black and heavy. The house was asleep, or at least it looked that way. David's steady breathing rumbled faintly down the hall. Margaret's lamp had gone out an hour earlier. But Claire was wide awake, her mind rattling like coins in a tin. The debt collectors had called again. Vince had texted twice, "Buyer ready. One more job." In and out. She'd stared at the message until her thumb hurt from gripping the phone. The paper she signed, the trap Margaret set, it couldn't matter if she just finished this one last job. Then she'd have money. Then she'd be free. At 12:47 a.m., Claire slipped from the bed. She moved like smoke, cardigan wrapped tight, hair pulled back, bare feet padding across the hallway. The study door opened with a sigh. The safe sat in its corner, squat and patient. Claire knelt before it, heart thundering, fingers trembling on the dial. 32 right. 16 left. 17 right. She had the numbers memorized like scripture. The handle groaned, the iron door swung, and the stale smell of paper drifted out. Her eyes scanned the shelves, photographs, receipts, that damned velvet bundle. But tonight there was something new. On the top shelf, in plain view, lay another USB drive, identical to the first but labeled in Margaret's neat handwriting, Archive 2. Beneath it, a crisp bank receipt. Claire snatched it up, expecting proof of Margaret's savings, maybe enough to blackmail her back. But the slip stole the breath from her lungs. Payment received, Bramble & Sons pawn. Item, gold ring, family heirloom. Paid by, Margaret Harper. Date, 3 weeks earlier. Her mother's ring. The one she had pawned quietly, telling herself it didn't matter, that no one would ever know. Margaret had bought it back. Margaret had known. Claire's chest tightened until it hurt. She pulled the velvet bundle closer and unwrapped it with shaking hands. Inside, the ring gleamed, catching the lamplight like a living eye. But this time it wasn't a lure. It was a reminder of her own betrayal, of debts that couldn't be excused. She fumbled for the USB, plugged it into her phone. The screen lit up with another video file. Claire tapped it, and her own face stared back. She was at the pawnshop counter, sliding her mother's ring across the glass. Her lips moved, bargaining, laughing nervously. The camera caught everything, the weight of greed in her eyes, the lie in her smile. A new timer appeared on the screen. Autosend in 5 o'clock. Destination, David Harper. No, 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 Claire whispered, her voice breaking. She jabbed at the phone, tried to cancel, tried to delete. But the screen only flashed a message, protected file. Cannot delete. Her pulse roared in her ears. Panic clawed her chest. She stuffed the USB back into the drive, scrambled to close the safe. But her hands slipped, her nails scratching metal, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The study door opened. Margaret stood there in her robe, calm as dawn, her shadow stretching across the floor. You never learn, she said quietly. Claire spun, tears in her eyes, clutching the velvet bundle as if it could shield her. Please, I just needed, just one last time. Margaret stepped closer, eyes fixed on the phone still glowing in Claire's hand. There is no last time, Claire. There's only the truth. And the truth is already on its way. Claire looked at the timer again. 2:43. She fell to her knees, sobbing, the ring clattering from her palm to the carpet. Please, don't let him see this. Please. Margaret crouched, picking up the ring with careful fingers, holding it between them like evidence. Her voice was soft, almost sorrowful. This wasn't about the money. It never was. You sold your mother's memory. And I bought it back, not to shame you, but to show you what you'd thrown away. Claire shook her head wildly, hands pressed to her ears, rocking on the floor. No, no. The timer ticked down. 1:15, the silence of the house seemed to lean in closer, as if every wall was listening. Margaret rose, slipping the ring into her pocket. It's too late, Claire. He deserves to know. Claire screamed, lunging for the phone, but Margaret's hand was already on the screen, calm and steady, her thumb hovering over the cancel option. For a heartbeat, hope flared in Claire's chest. Then Margaret's eyes hardened. But this time, I won't save you. The screen flashed. Sent. Claire collapsed against the rug, gasping, as if the air itself had betrayed her. Upstairs, the faint buzz of David's phone vibrated into the silence. The vibration of David's phone upstairs was faint, but in the midnight stillness it rang like a bell through the house. Claire's sobs cracked into silence. She stared at the stairwell as if the sound itself were a guillotine dropping slowly toward her neck. Margaret stood by the desk, calm, her hands folded around the phone she'd used to trigger the autosend. Claire's voice broke. Please, Cancel it, please. I'll do anything, Margaret, anything you want. But upstairs came the creak of bed springs, the shuffle of bare feet, and then David's voice, groggy and confused. What? Another buzz from his phone, then a sharp pause. The sound of rapid taps, his breathing shifting, sharper, ragged. Margaret's gaze stayed steady on Claire. You asked me for mercy. I gave it. Twice. Tonight you chose to cede again. The study door swung wider as David appeared at the threshold, phone glowing in his hand. His face was ashen, drained of sleep, his jaw locked so tightly that veins rose in his neck. His eyes flicked from the open safe to Claire's crumpled figure on the floor, then to his mother's composed stance. What is this? His voice cracked like a snapped branch. Claire scrambled forward on her knees, clutching at his arm. David, it's not what it looks like, I swear, she set me up. But David thrust his phone toward her. On the screen, video after video played in merciless silence, Claire slipping jewelry into her purse, exchanging cash across counters, smirking in pawnshop shadows. And finally, the ring. The ring she had sworn was lost, her mother's heirloom sliding across glass to a buyer. Claire froze. Her lips parted but no sound came. The evidence didn't allow for lies. David's hand trembled as he lowered the phone. How long? His voice was barely a whisper. How long have you been doing this to my family? Claire's body shook. She reached for him, desperate, but he stepped back. It was just a mistake, David. I was desperate, I didn't mean for it to go so far. Margaret spoke then, quiet but firm. It wasn't desperation. It was choice. Over and over again. Even after I gave her a chance to stop, she came back. David turned sharply to his mother. You knew? Margaret nodded once. Her eyes softened, though her mouth stayed firm. I knew. And I tried to spare you. But the truth has its own will. Claire's tears spilled fast. I did it for us, David. For our bills, for the debts. Margaret cut in, her voice sharper. Debts that were already repaid. That bank slip in the safe proves it. She kept stealing after the burden was gone. David's face twisted, confusion and anger colliding. Is that true? Claire's silence was enough. The weight of the house pressed down. Every tick of the grandfather clock sounded like a hammer. David dropped into the armchair as if the strength had been drained from him. He buried his face in his hands, his voice muffled but full of grief. You could have told me. You could have trusted me instead of this. Claire crawled closer, clutching his leg, sobbing, I was scared you'd hate me. David wrenched free, rising to his feet. You didn't give me the chance. His eyes burned with betrayal. For the first time since entering the room, Margaret moved. She closed the safe with a final, deliberate click, sealing away the photographs, the receipts, the velvet bundle. Her voice was calm, almost sorrowful. The house knows now. The walls have heard. And so has he. David stood there, torn, his chest rising and falling fast. Claire reached again, begging, but this time he didn't move closer. His gaze lingered on her like a man staring at someone he no longer recognized. The silence afterward was suffocating. The only sound was the faint hum of the heater, the house awake and listening to the ruin it now contained. And in that silence, Claire finally realized, she hadn't just been caught. She had been unmasked, stripped bare before the two people she could never deceive again. Dawn bled a gray line under the curtains. No one had slept. David sat on the edge of the armchair, elbows on knees, phone dark now, jaw set. Claire perched across from him, small and wrecked, cardigan clutched around herself like a borrowed skin. Margaret stood by the desk, the safe closed, the room as orderly as a courtroom. A knock broke the hush, 2 steady taps. Fiona Keene stepped in with a leather portfolio and the same calm that made bad news feel like clean stitches. You asked me to come early, she said. Is this the time? It is, Margaret replied. Fiona placed 3 documents on the desk, neat and symmetrical: the volunteer service and restitution agreement, the list of pawn receipts, and a single-page addendum with a blue tab. She did not raise her voice. "Mr. Harper, I need you to see that your wife signed this 6 nights ago, witnessed on video yesterday. It contains an admission. It also contains a condition: any dishonesty after the signature triggers the trust clause we updated this week." Claire's eyes snapped up. "Trust? What trust?" David looked between them, confusion knifing into anger. "What clause?" Margaret didn't flinch. "Your father's estate is held in the Harper family trust. I moved the house and the residual accounts into it when the gaps began. The update links Claire's own admission to a protection clause. If she continued to be dishonest after signing, she forfeits any spousal claim on trust assets." "That's not fair," Claire breathed. "You can't just erase me." Fiona's tone stayed professional. "No one erased you. Your marriage stands or falls by your husband. This only governs what you cannot take if you breach. And you did." She opened the portfolio and slid a small printout across the desk: the charity shop's end-of-day register summary, signed by Ivy. Drawer short by 5. Tip jar reduced. Camera tampered, the paperweight lens covered. Another page followed, a still from the mezzanine feed, yellow sticky note square and unmistakable. Claire stared at the image like it might blink and become kinder. "It was an accident. I moved it while dusting. I put the note down without thinking." "I logged the time," Margaret said softly. "And the jar before and after. I wanted to believe you. I wrote restraint required." Her voice thinned but didn't break. "Then you came back to the safe at midnight." David's face hollowed. "Claire, after you promised." Claire's mouth opened and closed. Words skittered and died. She pressed her palm to her eyes as if she could hold herself together by force. "I thought, if I just finished one last thing, Vince has a buyer, debts." The excuses collapsed under their own weight. She dropped her hand. "I don't have an excuse." Fiona turned the blue-tabbed page toward David. "This is the clause. It protects the trust from claims based on marital equity. It doesn't touch your income, your retirement earned outside the trust. But the house, the legacy accounts, the garden your father planted, none of it can be leveraged or claimed if Mrs. Harper breaches. And she has." David read, lips moving over sentences that felt like winter. When he looked up, his eyes were rimmed red, not with rage, but with something like mourning. "You built a trap," he said to his mother, accusation and gratitude braided tight. "I built a lock," Margaret answered. "For the door you didn't know someone was picking." Silence breathed. Outside, a delivery truck downshifted. The world went on, indifferent. Claire stood, sudden and shaky, as if standing could reverse gravity. "So that's it? You cut me out and call it justice?" Margaret held her gaze. "Justice would be police and headlines. I chose consequence. You keep your name. You keep whatever you earn. You do not keep what you tried to steal twice, our trust, and what his father intended for him." She reached into her robe pocket and brought out the small circle of gold, the ring Claire had pawned and Margaret had bought back. It glowed in the gray light like a memory refusing to dim. Margaret placed it on the desk between them, not pushing it toward anyone. "I returned this to show you what you were selling. Not to gloat. To mirror." Claire's breath hitched. For the first time her anger drained, leaving a raw, human ache. "I don't know how to come back from this," she whispered. David's answer was a long, scraped silence. "I don't know if you do." Fiona gathered the papers, efficient without being cruel. "For now," she said, "I recommend space. Mrs. Harper, you may remain here for 48 hours to arrange alternatives. No access to the study. No unsupervised time at the shop. We can draft a separation agreement if that's where this goes." She looked to David. "You can decide the rest when your head is clear." Claire nodded once, as if accepting a sentence measured in days instead of years. She reached for the ring, then stopped halfway and pulled her hand back. Keep it, she said hoarsely. Someone should. Margaret didn't move it. The ring stayed on the desk, a small son neither of them could claim cleanly. When Fiona left, the room felt larger, its edges harder. David picked up his coat without putting it on, needing something to hold. He looked at Claire like a man who'd found water in a desert and learned it was a mirage. I need air, he said, and stepped into the pale morning. Claire sank into the chair he vacated, eyes on the ring, shoulders shaking in a way that made no sound. Margaret turned the safe's dial again, not to hide, but to close the circle she'd drawn. The lock settled with a quiet, final click. The twist wasn't a reveal that screamed, it was a mechanism that held. And now it held them all. The house felt different by dawn. Not broken, not loud, just heavy, as though every wall had inhaled the night's truth and refused to exhale it. Claire sat at the dining table with untouched tea cooling in front of her. Her hands were still, her eyes hollow, no mask left to wear. Upstairs, David moved quietly, drawer to drawer, the muted rhythm of a man packing not for a trip but for escape. Margaret stood by the window, watching the frost thaw across the garden. The roses her late husband had planted were stripped bare for winter, thorny skeletons holding their ground. She thought of the family trust, his last legacy, and of how close it had come to being pawned away like another necklace. At 8:15, David descended with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He avoided his wife's gaze. I'll stay at Mark's for now, he said flatly. I need to breathe without all this choking me. His eyes flicked to his mother, torn between gratitude and resentment. Thank you for protecting what Dad left. But I don't know how to look at either of you right now. Claire rose so quickly her chair scraped the floor. David, please. Don't go like this. I made mistakes, yes, but, her voice broke. I thought I was saving us. I thought. You weren't saving us, he said sharply. You were saving yourself. And you were willing to burn everything else down to do it. His voice softened only at the end. I don't know if I can forgive that. The door shut behind him, leaving Claire trembling in the silence he left behind. Margaret crossed the room slowly. She carried something in her hand, the ring, small and gold, the one Claire had sold, the one she herself had bought back. She pressed it into Claire's palm, curling her fingers gently over it. Keep one memory honest, she said. Claire stared down at the ring, tears slipping hot and fast. Why would you give this back to me? Because punishment alone doesn't change people, Margaret answered. But reminders might. For a long moment neither spoke. The kitchen clock ticked, relentless. Then Margaret turned away, gathering her coat from the chair. You have until Sunday to decide where you'll go. After that, you can't stay here. Claire nodded, her shoulders folding inward. She didn't fight. She didn't beg. The fight had drained out of her, leaving only the ache of knowing how much she'd lost by her own hand. Later that week, Margaret sat at her lawyer's office, signing the final amendments to the trust. With each signature, the lock tightened, David's inheritance secure, the house and land shielded, Claire barred from ever touching it again. It was not victory she felt, nor triumph, but something quieter, relief mixed with grief, like closing a coffin you'd prayed never to need. That evening, she walked through the garden. The frost was gone, the soil dark and damp. She knelt by the rose bushes, pulling weeds with careful hands, whispering to her husband's memory. It's safe now. He can't see it yet, but it's safe. On her last night in the house, Claire packed slowly, the ring tucked in a small box at the bottom of her bag. She paused by the study door, staring at the safe she once thought of as treasure and opportunity. Now it looked like judgment in iron form. She turned away, shoulders sagging, and stepped out into the cold night. Margaret watched from the upstairs window. No gloating. No smile. Just the quiet weight of closure. Inside, the study waited, safe locked, papers filed, the velvet bundle gone. The house breathed easier, though scars remained. And in that silence, the truth lingered, trust, once broken, never returns whole. But justice, when measured carefully, leaves behind a memory strong enough to keep thieves awake at night. Claire would carry that memory forever. And Margaret would carry the peace of knowing the lock she built would never be broken again.